So I appreciate Jerry asking me to come down here tonight to do this presentation on the battle for Rivers Bridge. My name is Chris Sweatman, and I'm a member of the Rivers Bridge camp. That's all right. Also, recently, our 8th Brigade Commander, Buzz Braxton, asked me if I would like a promotion. So I accepted the Lieutenant Commander's position for the 8th Brigade, so here I am doing this presentation tonight. So I want to start by this question. Who's been to the Rivers Bridge battle site before? Okay, that's good. How about Broxton Bridge? All right. I've got pictures of both in here because the battles are connected. If you understand what happened on February 2nd and 3rd, which was a Thursday and a Friday of 1865, you know that these battles were very close together. It's only about 2.5, 3 miles down the river or so. And there's actually, I've got his picture, his tombstone picture in the presentation, and I've got some information on it. I don't know if I'll read it all tonight. But there's a tombstone at Broxton Bridge of a Confederate cavalry soldier who was shot in the leg at Broxton Bridge, and he rode all the way back to Rivers Bridge bleeding to death. Then when he got back to Rivers Bridge, he fell out the saddle dead. So if you pay attention through the presentation, you'll see his tombstone in both places. So the battle for Rivers Bridge. Let me get my little clicker here going. I just picked this up today, so this is going to be fun. All right. So what I wanted to do in this presentation is talk about the objectives for both sides. What did the Confederates want to do, and then what did the Federal Army want to do? One thing you're going to see me do through this presentation is, if I slip up and say the Union Army or the U.S. Army, somebody slap me when I'm done here tonight, okay? Because it's the Federal Army is what we should be saying in these presentations, all right? The Federal Army. So the objectives for the Confederate Army were to do what they can, or what they could, to prevent Sherman's army from advancing by blocking the crossings of the Big Salkehatchie River. If you've been down to Broxton Bridge and Rivers Bridge, you go all the way down to the water and look at the swamp. I've got a quote in here from one of the Yankee officers about how much he dreaded that swamp. It doesn't look like a very fun place to be marching through in the middle of the winter. Also, the Confederates wanted to preserve the cause of secession because our ancestors were fighting a noble and righteous cause. And we need to remember that. And the last slide that I have here tonight is going to be a picture from one of the stones out at Rivers Bridge. I want you to pay attention to what it says on there. This quote here from Private Lewis Radcliffe of the 2nd South Carolina Infantry. He says, "I cannot see for an instant how anyone could ever consent to living under Yankee rule who has lost a dear relative in this war. As for myself, I would rather die." And I was just reading about the surrender at Appomattox when Lee finally decided that he could not shed any more blood in defense of secession. He had about 27,000 men there. I know this is not Rivers Bridge, but it goes to the point of what this soldier said. He had about 27,000 men with him at Appomattox. And Lee had told the soldiers that he was going to surrender, and he was going to ask for terms with Grant. The soldiers came to Lee, and they rallied, and they cheered around Lee, and they said, "Let us fight one more time. We would rather go to battle and die than surrender to Grant today. That's what our ancestors thought about the noble and righteous cause which they were fighting. The objectives of the Federal Army. The Federal troops needed to cross the Big Salkehatchie in Bamberg County to continue their march to Columbia. Part of their objectives in South Carolina was to destroy the remaining Confederate forces and also destroy any and all means of supporting the Confederate Army, what was left of it at this time. And also based on the words of Sherman himself, and I'm going to show you those words in just a second. They wanted to enact vengeance on the Southern Army and the people of South Carolina. Here it is. Before entering South Carolina, William Tecumseh Sherman bluntly expressed the opinion that his troops were the troops. We're not only fighting hostile armies, but a hostile people. And that his men must make young and old, rich and poor, feel the hard hand of war, as well as their organized armies. So, you see what Sherman is declaring right there? Sherman is declaring war on a civilian population. This was something new. Sherman didn't care whether you had a uniform or not. You were his enemy and he wanted you dead. If you were a Southerner, especially a South Carolinian. Sherman went on to say, the truth is the whole army is burning. And that's a good word right there. Burning with an insatiable desire to wreak vengeance upon South Carolina. Sherman wrote shortly before the invasion, I almost tremble at her faith, but feel that she deserves all that seems in store for her. The her is South Carolina. How many native South Carolinians in this room tonight? I'm a native South Carolinian too. I was born in Charleston, and all but just working a job for about 3.5 years, I've lived in South Carolina my whole life. Sherman's strategy. Sherman had about 60,000 federal troops. He split them into 2 wings, and he tried to do that to confuse the Confederate command and prevent the Confederates from concentrating their forces. His strategy was to march through South Carolina, to destroy what he could, march into North Carolina, and then on to Virginia. If you know where Lee was at this time, Sherman was trying to put him in a pinch point. Lee had Grant on one side of him, and Sherman was quickly coming from the south on the other side. In Virginia, Sherman said he was going to link up with the army commanded by Grant and help to defeat Robert E. Lee's army. Sherman's left wing was 2 Army Corps of about 28,000 men under the command of Major General Henry Slocum. Slocum was to cross the Savannah River and move inland, appearing to threaten the city of Augusta, the home of the Confederate arsenal and munition factory. Union Cavalry Corps of about 4,500 men was led by Major General Judson Kilpatrick. If we get over to Barnwell in a couple weeks, you better remember that name Kilpatrick. Anybody know what Kilpatrick did in Barnwell?
We all do.
Yeah, he called it Burnwell when he was done there. Okay, I have that near the end of the presentation too. Sherman's right wing with the 2 corps of about 28,000 men were led by Major General Otis Oliver Howard. He was to march to Beaufort, which they already controlled since November of '61. Then Howard's wing was to give the threat, the impression that he was going to threaten Charleston. This is important, that he made this threat, this impression he was going to threaten Charleston. I'm reading a book right now that I bought at the convention. The lady, and excuse me, I don't have her name with me, I should have brought the book, but it's about the burning of Columbia. And she has compiled letters from the nights, mainly from February 17, 1865, when Sherman got to Columbia, that talk about what the citizens went through and what this Army did in Colombia. And that was Sherman's objective the whole time. He only acted like he was going to Charleston. And what this did was this fooled the people in Charleston, especially people that had money and had possessions. They loaded up their stuff on trains and wagons and hauled it all to Columbia. Just waiting on Sherman to get there. They didn't understand that. Now we can look back 157 years later and see what, and we know what happened. They didn't know what was happening. Remember, they didn't have Twitter, right? They didn't have Fox News or all this stuff. They had reconnaissance or cavalry trying to figure out what was going on. The two wings were to rendezvous along the South Carolina Railroad and continue to Columbia. Where's the South Carolina Railroad located in 1865? Branchville, South Carolina. It's about 12 miles from where I live. All right, so this, I've got some pictures that I took out of this visitor's guide that you can buy down at the Rivers Bridge Ranger Station. I think it costs $6 to buy this. I've got some pictures, but it's not a very good slide. I took this on my phone and then put it in the PowerPoint, but you can see the two armies. One was coming up this way and one was at Beaufort, and they both had to cross the Salkehatchie River. The Confederate first line of defense. The Confederate Army had about 20,000 men to defend South Carolina. Half of them were in garrisons in Charleston and Augusta. And the troops outside of the garrisons that could mount an active opposition to Sherman's army were about 5,000 infantry and artillery, commanded by General Lafayette, McLaws, and another 7,000 led by General Joe Wheeler. 7,000 cavalry. So, do the odds look good for the Confederates? You got 60,000 federal troops plus the cavalry, and then you've got only about 12,000 men to go up against that. The defensive strategy was designed by Beauregard and implemented by Lieutenant General William Hardee. The Confederate troops were told to hold the bridges crossing the rivers and then fall back to the next river behind it. When I was reading about this, the historian commentator that was writing about this said that this is one man's opinion, said that the Confederates knew they'd already lost, that Beauregard and Hardee knew they couldn't mount much of an opposition, but they were going to try anyhow. They were just outnumbered. Now that's one man's opinion. The Confederate fortifications. And this is what really makes Broxton Bridge and Rivers Bridge pretty special in my opinion, that these fortifications are still there. And these were dug by hand over just a several week period ahead of Sherman's advance. The Confederate line ran along the Combahee River and its swampy tributary, the Salkehatchie. The Confederate engineers designed defensive fortifications. Anywhere you see fortifications in this presentation, breastworks or earthworks, okay? That's what that means. Wheeler's cavalry would try to slow the Federal advance on the south side of the river, and the troops of McLaws would man the fortifications at the bridges on the north side. The Confederate troops would be stretched along a line about 45 miles long. Now, I just said you got 12,000 men, and you got 45 miles of a river to defend. That's a tough ask, isn't it? It's very tough. Okay, hopefully you can see the pictures okay. Would it help if we turned the lights off over there? Would that help you see the pictures better?
It's fine.
It's not? Okay. So these are some pictures from Rivers Bridge. Now these two I did not take myself. I got these offline. The rest of the pictures in this presentation I took myself. The ones at Broxton Bridge and at Rivers Bridge. Okay? When you get down to the battlefield at Rivers Bridge, and before you walk down the causeway to the river, you can make that right and come up on that artillery fortification where Earl had his battery there. So they had two cannons. Now, according to one of our camp members, Bart Chassereau, they had more than two there, but the story is they had two. Okay, so we'll go with what the official story is, that Earl's Battery had 2 cannons there, and they were sitting behind this hill, and right down there is the river. They had a very high position. You know, in 19th century warfare, if you had the high ground, you had a decided advantage over your enemy. Now, just to throw this in there, if you know what happened at Gettysburg with Little Round Top, when Grant told Longstreet that we have to take Little Round Top, and Longstreet dilly-dallied around till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they couldn't take Little Round Top. That's why I've always said, if Jackson was alive, the Virginians would have been standing on top of Little Round Top. You can bet on that. Jackson would have took that hill, okay, and we'd have won that battle. But that's just my opinion. There's some more fortifications at Rivers Bridge. This is part of the trench that the Confederate soldiers dug. And there's a schematic I'm going to show you in just a second. This is basically where the infantrymen would stand in this pit. And it was about head high in 1865. So they had just enough, and there's a drawing here to show you this, just enough where they could get their rifle over the top of it, and they could see over the top of it. And they had a little built-in shelf that they would stand on. This is some more, like all these pictures here I took myself out there. And the trench goes down and around. This right here, this is a very important picture to understand what happened at Rivers Bridge. So this is looking down the right end of the line. This is the right Confederate flank. And this is going to become very important as this presentation goes along and we see what happened in the battle. The right flank is what cost the Confederates Rivers Bridge. All right, Broxton Bridge. And I took these pictures of Broxton Bridge to show you because these battles happened on the same day, roughly the same time. All part of Sherman's army. They just about 12,000 Federals at one, 12,000 at the other. Okay. The Broxton Bridge, you know, is on private land. So you don't have to worry about South Carolina saying what you can and cannot do there. The Barn family still owns Broxton Bridge. This is some of the trenches that the infantry would have been in. Now, I took these pictures a little late. I should have been out there about a month earlier taking these pictures. But you can see where the trench is here. Okay, it's starting to grow up. Then at Broxton's Bridge, they only cut this a couple times, about 4 times a year that they mow this and cut this, okay, to keep the erosion down. All right, that's a sharpshooter mound, so the sharpshooter would have been behind that, waiting on the Federals. Just some more fortifications. All right, this is the Confederate view of the first branch of the Big Salkehatchie at Broxton Bridge. So that bridge is there now. That's a recent bridge that was built. The original bridge was a covered bridge. It was burned. So down this little causeway right here, that's where the Federals will be coming from. And I'm going to show you a picture facing the other way. This is some of the original pilings left in the Salkehatchie River of the original bridge. These right here. You go down there, you see that. Now, does anybody else think that's pretty cool beside me? This is what's left of the 19th century bridge right here in our own backyard. Okay? So this is what the Yankees or the Federals would have seen as they came across the last bit of the Salkehatchie, the Big Salkehatchie, the last channel, coming back up toward the Confederate position. This hill right here is bigger than it looks. If you're out there in person, this hill's pretty tall. This breastwork's here. And they had no idea that right down here, and I'm going to show you in just a second, were 12 guns. Cannons waiting on them at Broxton Bridge. Okay? This is where the Confederate artillery was. It's called a redoubt. Or they says fort out there at Broxton Bridge. This is an earthen hand-dug fort. They had 12 cannons inside of this at Broxton Bridge. Okay, I was standing up on the top of it, taking this picture. You just kind of, it's pretty small, actually, for 12 guns to be in there. All right, the Confederate fortifications at Rivers Bridge. Captain Benjamin S. Williams of the 47th Georgia. There was a lot of Georgia troops. There's mostly Georgia troops fighting there. I had, during my service in the Army, never seen a more advantageous position for resistance of attack than that at Rivers Bridge. We got another quote coming from Captain Williams in just a minute. And then the federal general here, Howard, it is the strongest position I've ever seen in my life. He also went on to say, describing the Salkehatchie swamp, this indescribably ugly Salkehatchie. Well, these federal troops, they weren't used to our landscape. So here's what I was talking about. This is kind of a cut out view of what the trenches would look like, the earthworks, and how the infantry soldiers would have stood up there. And they had this log up on top. This is a head log to protect him from federal rifle fire as well. All right. So when the governor of South Carolina, Governor Andrew Gordon McGrath, once he knew that Sherman was going to come into South Carolina, he started urging the citizens in the path of Sherman's army to take all of their property and move it or destroy it. So when you start reading about what happened here in this invasion, and you notice I do have that word, invasion, right? South Carolina is a sovereign nation. Sovereign nation. And you got an outside army invading our state. He told them to move it or destroy it so it could not be used by the federal troops. Northern newspaper reported that houses, farmyards, and workshops were closed, and the whole region seemed deserted. Know what I thought about that? I was like, are they writing about Sherman's march or are they writing about Cody? That's a little joke, right? Okay. Lighten the mood a little bit. The federal army, they generally burned the empty houses and structures they found. If you read about the burning of Columbia, they didn't care whether the women and the old ladies and the sick were them or not. They just torched them. Just read the accounts of the Confederate ladies that were there. They burned them.
They burned the houses and made the people in big forts stand out there and watch them burn. I've got the direct quotation from a great aunt, 5 years old, telling the Federals, don't take that meat out of my mama's house. They stood there, big fort did not desert. They did not move. They stood there and looked at everything burn.
When Sherman got ready to enter South Carolina on February 1, well, just before February 1, there was heavy rains and he was delayed a little bit. Howard's right wing marched along the south side of the Salkehatchie, and its goal was to take two major crossings of the river, Buford's Bridge and Rivers Bridge. That was their objective. The task of taking Buford's Bridge, the northernmost of the two crossings, fell to the troops of Major General John Logan's 15th Army Corps. Rivers Bridge was the objective of Major General Frank Blair's 17th Army Corps. And spearheading the advance on Rivers Bridge were about 5,000 men of the 1st Division of the 17th Corps. 17th Corps, commanded by Major General Anthony Mower. I don't know if it's Moore or Mower. I'm going to say Mower during the presentation. Somebody correct me later if I'm wrong. Mower did not have a good reputation when this whole thing was over. I'm going to show you some information near the end. So this is a drawing of what they thought the civilian evacuation looked like. People that owned farms and plantations and any kind of property, they were trying to get out of the way of Sherman coming. Don't you think they'd already heard what Sherman had done in Georgia? When he left Atlanta, he spread the troops out 60 miles wide, and he marched to Savannah. And they burned, raped, and pillaged everything they could find within those 60 miles. You tell I don't like Sherman, right? Is that coming out clear through the presentation? All right, the Confederate forces at Rivers Bridge. They were under the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Lieutenant General William J. Harding was the commander who was under Beauregard. the same border guard from Fort Sumter and Manassas. McLaw's division, well, he was Major General Lafayette McLaw's, and here are all the brigades and divisions, companies that were there. The main ones that did the fighting were the Georgia Infantry, Earl's Battery, and then some of the South Carolina Cavalry. And then some only got there on the second day, which is February 3rd. And then also, this is pretty interesting, there were troops there from Tennessee, Arkansas, 2 groups of cavalry from Texas, including some of the Texas Rangers were there. If you get the opportunity to go down to Broxton's Bridge and get Bart Chassereau and take you on a tour down there, Bart will show you right where the Texas Rangers were camped, where they had the horses and everything tied up. It's right there off the road. You're on 601, you look off the road, it's right there, is where the Texas Rangers were. Pretty interesting stuff. The federal forces at Rivers Bridge. Good old Sherman. And the right wing of the Army of the Tennessee. Major General Oliver Otis Howard. The 17th Army Corps, the 1st Division led by General Maurer. And then all of these divisions here. You'll see the 64 and the 39th Ohio mentioned. And also the one from New Jersey and the 32nd Wisconsin. They were very important at this battle. And the 1st Division Pioneers. And before I get to that in the presentation, anybody know what the Pioneers were doing for Sherman as he was marching across South Carolina? With a little trivia question built in here. I know Miss Miller knows. Anybody else know? They were building corduroy roads. You know what a corduroy road was? They'd take smaller trees. If you look, sometimes they call them saplings. They'd take these smaller trees, they'd lay them one way, and they'd lay them the other way. That way they could ride the horses and pull the cannons and the wagons and everything else across the lowland, the swampy areas. That way they wouldn't be between neck deep and knee deep in mud in the swamp. All right, here we go, the actual battle. Day 1, Thursday, February 2nd, 1865. Again, this is just over 157 years ago, right? The Battle for Rivers Bridge is one part of 4 separate battles that took place as the Federal Army tried to cross the Big Salkehatchie. The Confederates were strung out along the river, starting at Whippy Swamp Creek, extending up the river to 3 crossings, Broxton River and Buford's Bridge. Okay? Now, there are breastworks on private property down near Crocketville at Whippy Swamp Creek, but I've been told you can't go in there. I don't know. Has anybody ever been in there and seen those breastworks? The federal troops, they put about 12,000 men at each of the 3 bridges. Now, it depends on what you read. Some of these numbers may be a little bit different, but this is what the information I got. There was about 2,500 Confederates at Broxton Bridge, and about 1,200, that's including the reinforcements that got there on day 2. They started out around 800. 800 against 12,000. Okay. You don't think these boys were brave? This is some of the bravest men that ever walked the face of the earth.
We had to give the Union an opportunity. I mean, they didn't have camps if it wasn't for that.
Should have slowed them down a little bit. Too bad it wasn't summer, so they could have got some of them copperheads and stuff in there, right? So about 1,200 Confederates at Rivers Bridge. Most of the rest of this, beside the gravestones, is going to be focusing on Rivers Bridge. The order to attack came at about 0830 at Whippy Swamp Creek. That's where they first engaged. Battle was on. This next to last bullet point right here is very important. The temperature that morning was 17 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
17 degrees. It was cold. And they had to walk through a lot of water. The federal attack on Rivers Bridge started at almost noon. That's when they got ready to go. Day one continued. General Maurer ordered one regiment, the 25th Wisconsin Infantry, to charge down the causeway and take the Confederate position by direct frontal assault. If you've been out the Rivers Bridge, what does that sound like to you?
Suicide.
Suicide mission. That's exactly what this Yankee general did to his men. Suicide mission. When the Confederates opened up the cannons, when they opened up Earl's battery on them, it was game on, and the Federal attack was stopped about halfway through the swamp. You go to stand on that position where Earl's battery was, it's high. And you can see right down in where the river is. You're already reading it. Halfway through the swamp, instantly killing several men, including the regiment's bugler. His head was blown off by a shell. Maurer revised his tactics and ordered the men into the swamp, where they also came under cannon fire. When he realized a frontal assault wasn't going to work against the strong Confederate fortifications, Maurer set the pioneers to work, building a corduroy road to flank the Confederate position. This is key to the battle right here. This is one thing that Maurer did that was smart. He realized he couldn't take them head on. Now think about this. He had 12,000 men. There was 800 boys wearing gray there, and he knew he couldn't take 800 with 12,000 men.
That's big.
Okay?
Not real smart.
So he said, I got to march around. This is all the way down at the end at Rivers Bridge, a picture of the swamp where the bridge used to be. I took this Saturday afternoon. I'm sure it looked a little bit different. In 1865, yeah, I thought about that when I was standing down there. This guy was some good redbreast in that swamp.
I thought many was right there in that spot.
It's hard to see, but there is still some of the footing left. If you've been down there, you've seen the footing of the bridge. There's still a little bit there. Like I said, it's a little bit dark, and we got a lot of cloud cover Saturday too, so it's hard to get a real good picture. Okay, day one. Federal tactics result in heavy casualties and defeat. The Confederate commanders feared a flanking attack would come, and they knew they were vulnerable. Remember Captain Williams talking about that strong position when he got there? He said, we anticipated a flank movement and dreaded it more than a square face-to-face fight. Again, if you know anything about 19th century warfare tactics, when you got flanked, it was all over with. How do you think Jackson whipped so many Yankee units? Flanking. I never knew where Jackson was. When asked by General McLaws on February 3rd how long he could hold his ground, Lieutenant Colonel Edward H. Bacon Jr., the 32nd Georgia, reportedly replied, I can hold my position here, General, until Christmas, if you can keep them off my flanks. Well, we'll see what happens. The Federal regiments rotated in and out of the swamp on day one, the rest of the day and into the night. The freezing cold water of the Salkehatchie was waist deep in some places, forcing the men to sling their cartridge boxes. I should have brought my cartridge box. Anybody else got a cartridge box for reenactment? You know what they look like? Well, they had 40 rounds and paper cartridges in the boxes, leather boxes. You got a strap that goes around, and they held on about right here, right on their right hip. Okay? And keep your powder dry. This is it, right? You get your powder dry, it ain't going to work in these weapons, except the 9th and the 10th Illinois. The 9th and the 10th Illinois, and this has been historically verified because of the bullets that have been pulling out the breastworks at Broxton Bridge. The 9th and 10th Illinois were carrying Henrys. Y'all know what a Henry rifle is? Some of you may have a Henry rifle. They're still sold. They're nice. They're expensive now.
I got one.
Yep. All right. So what did the Confederates say about the Henry rifle? That's that damn Yankee gun that they load on Sunday and shoot all week. 18 rounds. Okay, 18 rounds. If a soldier was good, they claimed they could shoot 2 or 3 rounds a minute, loading those rifled muskets. I haven't tried to do it yet, but it sounds like a pretty tall task to me. Okay? But I know about shooting a Henry rifle. Yeah, you can shoot that thing pretty fast. All right, so they had to carry that back to the cartridge boxes here in the second bullet point. So what they did is they slung them around their neck. Either they put them on the muzzle of their muskets and hold them up over their head and walk through the swamp like this, holding their cartridge boxes up to keep the ammunition dry. Those relieved of their duty returned to the high ground back behind the swamp to replenish their ammunition and to try to dry out. Some assisted the pioneers in building corduroy roads to make the Federal flanking maneuver. The Confederates tried to avoid sharpshooter fire by staying hunkered down in their fortifications. And the last bullet point here on this slide, look what it says. 17 degrees that morning, that night of February 1st, Thursday night, it poured down rain. A heavy, cold rain. You just saw the trenches, right? Those boys stood in that trench that night. Well, what else did they do? So I know this is a little difficult to see, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea of the troop movements here. So the Confederates were entrenched up here. This is the causeway kind of runs this way right here. So they were trying, the Yankees or the Federals were trying to advance up the causeway, and that's where they met the Confederate fire there on day 1. Day 2, on the morning of Friday, February 3rd, 3 regiments of Maurer's 3rd Brigade moved into the swamp. Around noon, men of 1 regiment, the 32nd Wisconsin, managed to wade through the swamp and get their feet on dry ground on the north side of the Saugerhatchee. It was just upstream, so that'd be the Confederate right of the causeway. This thick swamp gave cover to the Federal troops, allowing them to come within rifle range of the Confederate fortifications. That's 50 to 100 yards. When the Wisconsin troops emerged from the swamp, officers and enlisted men took cover behind the trees and stumps as they came under heavy fire from the Confederates in the earthwork fortifications. When Maurer learned of the 32nd Wisconsin's breakthrough, he moved quickly to exploit it. Maurer ordered the bulk of his division to move through the swamp on one of the corduroy roads the pioneers had constructed. This move was designed to attack the Confederate right flank. Maurer attempted a diversion. He wanted the Confederates to think that he was going to put another frontal assault on them. So he did small attacks straight on up the causeway, head on to the Confederate fortifications. The 10th Illinois, what did I just tell you a minute ago they were carrying? Henry rifles. The 10th Illinois, some of them were, about 50 of them, were supposed to be carrying Henry rifles. They made the first diversionary attack just downstream the causeway. They felled trees across the river and scrambled over and behind them to take cover. They were pinned down by heavy Confederate rifle fire. So downstream, if you're at Rivers Bridge, downstream is the Confederate left position. And they have more breastworks on that side, but if you've been out there, they're not well cared for like the ones on the right side of the causeway. But that's where the rifle pits were, where a lot of the rifles were from Confederates. Maurer then ordered the 43rd Ohio to charge down the causeway carrying axes and boards to repair the damaged bridge. That sound like a general that cared much for his men? Remember, Earl's got 2 cannons sitting up there on that hill, and he's going to send these guys right down the causeway. Suicide. 100% suicide mission. Confederate cannon fire stopped the advance of the 43rd Ohio, forcing them to take cover in the swamp. several companies of the 63rd Ohio, they were sent in the fall of 43rd. So when I start reading these historical accounts, I start thinking, hold on a second. If I'm in the 63rd Ohio, I can see up there, look, them boys in the 43rd, they get cut to shreds by those boys in gray with those rifles and those cannons. And you want me to go up there too? Anyhow. They came under deadly cannon fire from Earl's Battery. Major Horace Park of the 43rd Ohio pulled the 63rd Ohio off the road and called it, quote, madness for them to continue. However, the diversion had the effect that Mauer intended. The Confederates concentrated their attention on the center of the line while the Federal Army attack fell on their right flank. The flank attack surprised the Confederates, but they managed to fight in retreat. One Confederate veteran recalled years later that the Southern troops pulled back in an orderly fashion under the cover of a smoke screen created by 4 quick volleys of rifle and cannon fire. One of the last Confederate casualties fell just before the retreat. Lieutenant Simeon S. Kirby of Earl's Battery was shot dead beside one of his cannons by a Federal soldier who had crept up to within 20 to 30 feet of the fortifications. After Kirby was shot, one of his men borrowed a rifle from one of the nearby infantrymen and killed the Yankee sharpshooter. That's Kirby's headstone on Rivers Bridge right there. Now, you see something funny about the headstone? If you can see it, the date says January 31. That date's wrong. Day 2. At the same time, the Federals hit the Confederate right flank. Federals from Blair's 17th Corps crossed the swamp further downstream between Rivers Bridge and Roxton Bridge, okay? This is the Confederate left. So they're flanking them on the right. Now they're starting to flank them on the left. This gave the Federals a decided advantage. They now had flanking positions on both ends of the Confederate line. This forced the Confederate retreat from the fortifications at Rivers Bridge. The battle was essentially over then. McLaws wrote, it was with difficulty that my command could be withdrawn, as I was completely flanked on both sides. The Federal victory. The entire Confederate line on the Salkehatchie and Combahee was abandoned as they withdrew from the other fortified river crossings. Remember when I started on this, what did I say that Beauregard and Hardee told them to do? He said, hold the rivers as long as you can hold them, then fall back to the next river. Captain Jackson, back to the second bullet point. Despite the Federal victory at Rivers Bridge, some Federal soldiers questioned the tactics of Mauer. Captain Jackson of the 63rd Ohio wrote in his diary that many soldiers condemned Mauer for needlessly, quote, shoving his men against the enemy in such a place. Remember, that was the 43rd and the 63rd Ohio. He told them to march up the causeway with axes and boards while they're putting cannon fire down on them. Here are the losses. And depending on what you read, you may see some different numbers, okay? But these are the numbers that I'm going to share here, okay? The Confederates at Rivers Bridge, 8 were killed. If you include Broxton Bridge, it was 19. Again, that number may be a little different depending on what you read. 44 were wounded, 24 captured, and the Federals, 18 were killed, and 106 wounded. Well, this was the outcome of losing those river crossings. The Federal troops pilfered and burned after Rivers Bridge. They went and stole every chicken, pig, cow, whatever they could find. They stole it, ate it, and then burned everything left behind. On February 6th, the Federal troops resumed their march. Barnwell and Blackwell were burned on February 7th. Remember Kilpatrick? Kilpatrick burned Barnwell, and he joked that he had changed his name to Burnwell. He's a real nice guy, wasn't he? Real peach. Sherman's army reached its objective at the South Carolina Railroad in Branchville on February 8th and proceeded to tear up miles of track. General Joe Wheeler surprised the Yankees around Aiken on February 11th, and he gave them a pretty hard time for a while there in Aiken. But all that did essentially was just slow them down a little bit. On February 17, year of our Lord, 1865, Sherman enters Columbia and unleashes his army to steal, pillage, and burn the city. If you read the Yankee historians, they're going to say that Sherman didn't know what the army was doing. That's a complete lie. Because if you read the accounts of the men and the women that were in Columbia on the night of February 17, 1865, they say that there was a clear launch of rockets, signal rockets, at about 8 or 9 o'clock that night. They launched them, and then all hell broke loose in Columbia. Then early that morning, there was another signal went out that all of a sudden the troops quit doing what they were doing, and they fell back. They were ordered to burn Columbia. Captain Benjamin S. Williams of the 47th Georgia Infantry. This came out of this book here. I know it's not the best picture, but this little write-up right here, I know you can't read it, but this is the picture of the flag that he had with him at Rivers Bridge. He survived Rivers Bridge. His mother had hand-sewn that flag for him. The bullet holes that are in that flag came from Yankee fire at Rivers Bridge. He kept that flag with him. He carried it out when they retreated, and he carried that flag with him the rest of his life. Okay? There's a Confederate memorial out at Rivers Bridge. I didn't get the picture quite square because I was trying to get the flag in the picture. There's our flag right there, ladies and gentlemen. This is a nice cemetery they have out there for the boys that died there. There's some of the pictures of the headstones. It's real nice. If you haven't been out there to see it, you should. Buzz, go ahead.
I've been told that the head of the PRT, Dan Bell, he's not the head, but
He's in charge out there, right?
he's in charge. He's the honey hole that takes care of making rules. And he, if I'm correct, he wants to put up an Ohio flag along with the U.S., the South Carolina.
And the Confederate, 3 flags flying out there, U.S. and South Carolina and Confederate right now.
And he's from Ohio, and he wants to fly a Ohio flag over, right there, over the Confederate graves.
Yeah, that's good.
Can the Rivers Bridge
Ohio, that,
Association stop him?
that's Sherman's from Ohio. Okay.
Yes, it should be.
So, again, it's hard to tell on these pictures. This is some of the individual headstones out there. It says, "Killed in action, Rivers Bridge," on them.
But we would not have that memorial ground if the 90 acres had not been kept intact. And Mr. Jenny was the one that gave that 90 acres. And then the surrounding area. The graveyard on there that's got Air people in it lets me know that that was Air property before the Jennies ever got into the picture.
Okay.
And the village that was destroyed there, Enon Christian Church, That's why there's a
Yep.
black church across there.
Across the road, yeah.
Post
Yeah,
office.
yeah, the story says they burned the church right there too.
Where the pavilion is
Yep.
right now.
Yep.
And the men could not bury these Confederates while Reconstruction was going on. So that's why in 1876, a Friday, we won't prowl on Friday. And it was such a macabre test to bury men been lying there 10 years, you know, that's a mess. We're coming back next year, and the Rivers Bridge Confederate Memorial Association was born at that particular time. Now, have you taken any pictures at Buford's Bridge?
I did not get the Buford Bridge.
Get down there, because you've got some fortifications that you might like to include in this presentation.
I definitely
Because
have.
that's flanks. They only had a 2-gun battery at Buford's
Buford's
Bridge
Bridge.
because it's a town. And Mizpah Church is there simply because everything in the town was burned and all the houses were burned. And Sherman did not make his headquarters there, though he and Howard met at Buford's Bridge.
After they crossed, right?
But if those men had not saved that, we wouldn't have it. And they gave it to the Forestry Commission. Now it's PRT. And Bart Sashro's got more people to be buried in there, and they won't let him bury them, so
Yeah, I talked
it's a
about that.
mess.
Bronson Bridge. Now again, this is on private property, the Varn family property, just down the river from Rivers Bridge.
5,000 acres is there, so I know that took some finagling to keep it.
And this right here, Bart Chassereau. He's the one that made this happen. Get those headstones and that fence. Bart let me go in there. Bart took me on this tour. Let me take these pictures. Now, this is the last slide. This is the last slide in my presentation. I hope you can see this. It says Colvin County. There's Allendale and Bamberg County out there too. They don't have this inscription on it.
Did you take pictures of the other 3 counties? Because 4 counties come together in one spot.
I took some pictures, but I didn't put them in the presentation because I like
The
what this
next time,
inscription
you
said.
put it from the others.
In memory of our Confederate soldiers who here gave their lives in defense of a righteous cause.
Amen.
And if you don't remember nothing else about what I talked about tonight, and I've been talking for 53 minutes. Does it seem like I've been talking for 53 minutes? I said I know how long this is going to take. I've been talking 53 minutes. If you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember that right there, in defense of a righteous cause. And you don't let anybody ever tell you that these boys weren't fighting for a righteous cause. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. It's all yours, Commander.
I'm gonna let you cut everything off. I don't wanna mess up your presentation that much.
The Yankees still wanna say it was nothing but slavery. That's all they
You
want to talk
can
about.
turn that projector off now.
You know, the one thing about when I go past River Bridge, hang loose a minute, we ain't quite finished yet. When I go right there coming up from Buford, coming to the meetings and stuff, I always come through the Miley Way. And I look at that and I said, you know, look what those men went through. And then we